Hello, everybody. My name is Adam Thorne, and welcome to the Australian Aviation Podcast. Now, today we have had some big breaking aviation news on Bonza, who, rather than pulling back, are actually expanding by moving to the Gold Coast. This happened mere hours before we started to record this. But before we talk about the news, I will introduce my two co-hosts, Chris Fenton. Chris, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Adam. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. And Jake, how are you doing?
I'm better than you're sounding, Adam. I want it on record that if we get COVID and die, it is your fault.
Absolutely, it will be. What a very funny death you'll have. Anyway, before we go into the news, we always have a lot of announcements to make now, and that was, I like to think, because we're getting ever more important and
Absolutely.
special. So, Chris, start us off.
Yes.
What announcements have we got for our listeners? Lucky listeners this week.
Our lucky listeners this week. Very, very lucky. So, in short, Australian Aviation has had, the website's had a bit of an exciting makeover. It's looking fantastic. There's lots of new content on there. And we're doing a bit of a subscription push today, Adam. So, basically, I've spoken to the powers that be, and anyone who decides to sign up and join the Australian Aviation family as a member, there's a couple of different packages they can take. There's a print and digital, so they'll get our beautiful print magazine 4 times a year, plus all of our daily newsletters that come out. Or there's just a digital membership as well. So anyone who would love to sign up to the Australian Aviation website, and we certainly hope there's a few of you out there, an exclusive offer just for our listeners is a beautiful 20% off any membership packages. So a print and digital package generally starts at $99.95.
Already a bargain, I would say. Already a bargain.
But for a very short time, we are giving our wonderful listeners a 20% discount. So that drops the print and
How's
digital.
your maths now? How's your maths?
$79.95.
Yeah, I hope you worked that out beforehand.
I did work that out beforehand. So in order to sign up, all you need to do is visit the Australian Aviation website. At the top of the page, there's a section called Become a Member. Sign up to become a member. In the checkout box, apply the discount code PODCAST. It's that simple. Podcast.
And every cent will go towards supporting a hard-working journalist.
Absolutely.
And they need the money. And podcast hosts, we need the money as well.
Absolutely. However, there's a bit more to this. Though,
even
Adam.
more. They've already been generous. They've been so generous.
Know,
Don't give them too much.
But as you know, we've got the amazing Australian Aviation Awards coming up very, very soon, 31st of August at the Star in Sydney. Now, for our Sydney listeners and viewers, anyone who signs up by the 20th of August this month will go in the draw to win 2 tickets to the awards night. The night of nights.
But we shouldn't. I don't agree with this. We shouldn't be giving these away. What are you on about? It's too valuable.
It's extremely valuable, the cost of these tickets.
You're just too generous. I wouldn't be doing this. You're too generous. You're too decent.
Management did it, but there's a bit of a bigger catch.
Even more. This is ridiculous.
I feel like a TV host.
Sure,
but wait, there's more. So the lucky winner will not only win 2 tickets to the Night of Nights on the 31st of August in Sydney at the Star, they will be a guest at either your table, Adam, or my table on the night. So
I never signed this off.
One lucky winner will win 2
off.
tickets, but it does come with a disclaimer. The winner will be from Sydney. So I have to disclaim that. They will be from Sydney. And all we are covering is the cost of the tickets to the night.
Still very generous. I mean, you get to meet me and you. I mean,
absolutely.
That's extraordinary.
And Jake
as
will
well.
be there, so you'll get to meet the A-team.
Yeah. Look, the first prize is 2 tickets to the Australian Aviation Awards. The second prize is 2 tickets to the Australian Aviation Awards, but they have to sit on one of our tables. So that's the catch. Another catch, of course, is that this is exclusively for our podcast listeners. You will have to prove that you're a podcast listener on the night by quoting at least 5 of my terrible puns.
Well, I mean, to be fair, there's so many to choose from that you're not. It's not like there's 5 scattered across 6 months worth. I mean, you'll get about 40 or 50 per episode.
You will need to be writing a list and itemizing that.
Right.
But anyone who One lucky winner will join us on the night, but anyone else wanting to purchase a ticket to the Night of Nights, tickets are still on sale. So call our beautiful Lizzie from the delegate sales team on 028357 5440. That's 02 for Sydney, 8357 5440 to secure your tickets.
And any winner who regularly comments on our Facebook page will be screened in advance for knives.
Well, yes, of course. Now, do you have any announcements for us, Jake?
Yes. Well, we've been casting our net out for names for the Australian Aviation Awards. We've had a couple of suggestions come in over the past few days. Shout out to Malcolm Bowes here, who says that his suggestion for a name for the Australian Aviation Awards is the Skywards, or possibly Skywards.
That's all right, to be fair. I could see that.
It is a good one.
That works.
He says as well, thanks for all the work you do on the podcast. It's a highlight of each week or so. So thank you for that, Malcolm. We've also had just an absolutely terrible name suggestion.
Well, but let's be the judge of that.
No, just the worst we've ever. I don't even know. I'm reading it. Old Croaky. Was this you, Adam?
No.
Was it you, You sound like Old Croaky today. Old Croaky says, I guess professional modesty has deterred Adam from suggesting that the Australian Aviation Awards be known as the Thornies.
It's a great idea.
It's a terrible idea.
I actually like that.
I think that's quite good.
It's an awful idea. Awful idea.
No,
I think we
like
should.
that.
And I think we need to. I mean, we've got branding people. We get this done as a logo and stuff. Like
absolutely.
No, you know what it sounds like? It sounds like the Gardener of the Year award, the Thornies, or Cactus Keeper of the Year.
I don't think so. I'd like to think my star has shone so brightly that it's now the first thought in people's minds is me, not people getting stung or getting their legs caught in nettles.
Absolutely, the man, the myth, the legend that you are. I know. I really like the Thornies. I really like the Thornies.
Well,
yeah, but what happens when you invariably get fired after the incident comes to light?
Well, it won't happen because I'm very careful with what I say, unlike some. And on that note, we're going to go for a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the news. We'll be back in a minute. Okay, welcome back. So in the hours before we started recording this, we had a big breaking news story around Bonza. Jake, tell us more.
Yeah, Bonza at midnight on Tuesday morning dropped the news that it is adding a third base of operations in the Gold Coast. So that's right near its existing base of the Sunshine Coast. From November, it will be flying to 11 existing destinations, but new routes. So it will be going to Albury, Bundaberg, Cairns, Gladstone, Mackay, Melbourne Avalon, Melbourne Tullamarine, Mildura, Rockhampton, Townsville, and the Whitsunday Coast. I believe that, 8 of these 11 new routes are not being served by any other airline, which is, it's standard operating procedure for Bonza, flying new routes that nobody else is doing. And it will be 70 new flights per week, almost 700,000 additional passenger seats per year into and out of the Gold Coast Airport.
So one of the extraordinary things about this announcement, other than that it was a bit of a surprise, was that only, 1-2 weeks ago, we had the news that Bonza were cutting back some of its unsuccessful routes. So it started off, it had 27, and then they've cut 5 routes. They said that they made this cut kind of sooner than they would have expected. And now 2 weeks later, in fact, on the very day that these routes were going to be axed, we're now seeing a really, really big expansion. What does that tell us, Jake? Because what they've done here, they've very much sort of change the narrative from one that is an airline that might well be in decline to one that's continuing to grow.
Well, one very savvy thing that they're doing, and this was some ways down the press release, but they mentioned that they are going to be, 2 aircraft are going to be based at the Gold Coast, but they're also going to be wet leasing aircraft from an unnamed partner. We can speculate as to which partner that might be, but they will be, because one of the reasons why they had to cut back on those initial 27 routes is because they only had the 4 planes. But if they're starting to wet lease aircraft from other carriers, then that would give them more room to grow. And not have to wait on these deliveries of these extra 737 MAX 8s.
So in talking of what a wet lease is, for those that aren't aware, a wet lease usually involves, it sounds like a pop group, a wet lease usually involves you not only getting the aircraft from another carrier, but also getting the crew as well. So it may well be branded as Bonza, but you're essentially getting another company providing the service. So not the Bonza Legends. This is a hugely significant
I'm sure Bonza
announcement.
will call them Bonza Legends.
They probably will still call them Bonza Legends, but will they be totally Bonza Legends? That's probably another podcast in of itself.
If it's a dry lease when you only get the plane, and a wet lease when you get both the plane and the crew.
Here comes a pun. Go on.
Well, I mean, is like if you just get the crew, like a moist lease. If you just get the crew.
God, Chris, can bring you in here before it gets
gone to the gutter.
Gone to the gutter, yeah.
So look, I think it's very exciting news, and well played, Bonza. Today, social media has just been lighting up with lots of super exciting comments about Bonza's expansion and arrival into the Gold Coast as a third base. Interesting news on the wet lease. I was quite surprised by that, and as Jake's alluded, lots of speculation as to who that could be, and I'm sure the smart cookies in the room, we could probably have a safe guess as to who it is. I'm not going to say it, but we could probably have a safe guess who it is. It will be interesting to see, though, if Bonza do place their own legends on board as well, just to give it that Bonza flair, because sometimes with a wet lease, the aircraft could be branded differently, and the crew aren't always in the same uniform. So they, if it's a Timbuktu Airlines and Timbuktu crew with their own uniform, is what passengers can see and expect on board. So it'll be interesting to see if Bonza do go ahead and put their own legends on board. But super exciting news. I think good on Bonza.
Slightly damp lease, maybe.
And this may well be out of date by the time you are listening or viewing this, but when they made this announcement, they made no announcement as to who or which airline would be doing the wet leasing. Don't say anything right there, Jake, because there's a pun coming. We didn't know who was going to be doing the wet leasing. Now, that's very intriguing, because if they are hoping to start a staggered launch from November, and bearing in mind tickets are going to go on sale very soon, you would imagine they would almost certainly have to have that agreement in place. So do we have any idea who it might be or why they are keeping tight-lipped at the time of recording?
This is purely speculation on our part.
For lawyers
purely speculation on our part. The most logical option would probably be Alliance. Alliance, because this new base is opening up on the Gold Coast. Alliance is based in Queensland. Alliance has a massive fleet of E-jets. And, some people have been saying that, Bonza's strategy of flying 737 MAX 8s everywhere, might not be practical for every route. Well, the E-jet is a smaller plane. It has less capacity. It's sort of probably cheaper to run than the MAX 8. And so if you've got E-jets flying some of these routes, I mean, Alliance, I think, has 33 at the moment with another 30 on order. So Alliance would be the most logical conclusion to wildly jump to. I can't see them going with National Jet Express because NJE is owned by Rex, and there hasn't been a lot of love lost between Rex and Bonza. I could be wrong, but I also don't see Rex really, wet leasing their NJE jets to Bonza as well. I think Alliance is probably the most logical conclusion that we could jump to.
This would be a bit of a change of strategy in the sense that previously they had their own, or from their sort of parent organisations, 737 Maxes. So this would be quite a different change. It does show that Bonza are going to be a lot more flexible moving forward. The kind of advantage of leasing is obviously it gives you that flexibility to be able to take the aircraft or give it back when you don't need it. It's less of a kind of upfront investment in getting new aircraft. So again, if there's a theme, it's that Bonza do seem to be willing to prepare or change their plan as things go along. It's also a sign of the times in that now it's actually quite difficult to get hold of brand new aircraft. You're on a long, long waiting list.
Especially the MAX 8. I mean, just look at how much trouble Virgin's been going through to get its hands on one MAX 8.
And also, it's not just getting that. You obviously have to get the crew on board. You have to get everybody else. So if you can get a ready-made solution, that will solve a lot of problems.
And I mean, Qantas does it with Qantas Link as well. Qantas is wet leasing, aircraft and crews from Alliance themselves.
Let me talk next about about picking the Gold Coast as its airport, because previously we've spoken about Newcastle. Obviously, they've been open that they have long-term ambitions to get into Sydney. Gold Coast isn't necessarily the top destination that came up when we were bandering around ideas, it seemed to come as a bit of a surprise.
Yeah, I was very surprised when I saw the Gold Coast because, I had tipped, I guess egg on my face now, but I had tipped a few weeks ago that, the most likely option for a third base for Bonza would be Newcastle because it's very close to Sydney and it would be an expansion into the New South Wales market, which is, of course, biggest state in Australia. You might be able to carve off a bit of a slice of that traffic from the Sydney basin if you have people who are prepared to go up to Newcastle to get a cheap flight to, wherever, or the only flight that's available to wherever. So I would have thought that Newcastle would have been a logical option. Newcastle had been making overtures to Bonza to become the third base. So when Gold Coast dropped as the third base, I was a bit surprised, particularly considering that Sunshine Coast is, right there. It's practically right next to the existing base for Bonza. Having said that, I can see some of the logic because the Gold Coast is a very popular destination. Particularly for holiday goers. So if you're living in Mildura, and you want to go to the Gold Coast, right now your option is to fly up to the sunny coast and then go from there, or go down to Melbourne and then catch a flight with Jetstar or something. Whereas if Bonza launches a flight direct from Mildura to the Gold Coast, then you can go direct without having to go via Melbourne or sunny coast.
And it also seems to me that they are, much like we did previously, almost like they're launching all these routes, knowing that maybe some of them won't succeed, but they kind of might as well have a go, which seems to me like the Bonza strategy so far. It does seem to be broadly working.
Yeah, kind of a shotgun strategy, if you will. Or, throwing pasta at the wall to see what sticks, except pasta is planes and the wall is the sky. So not quite a perfect analogy. But that is... And Tim Jordan, the CEO of Bonza, has acknowledged that, that sort of... part of the strategy, like they were always going to cut back on routes that weren't working. And they have, in the process, discovered routes that have been working very well for them. Perhaps some might say unexpectedly well. Melbourne to Port Macquarie, for example. Who would have predicted that Melbourne to Port Macquarie would be such a successful route that they would have had to be increasing capacity now?
Well, on that note, we're going to go for a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about slots, as we always do. We'll be back in a minute. Okay, welcome back. So we're now going to return to what is a theme of the show.
Previously on the Australian Aviation Podcast.
Yes, so we're going to talk a little bit more about slots. But before we steam into the latest slot news, I will give, for those, like a dummy's guide to slots, for those people with active...
That's good. I really need a dummy's guide to slots,
For people
Adam.
with active social lives and happy relationships who maybe aren't
Can you
aware,
maybe make it a complete idiot's guide, just for my sake?
Yes, a complete idiot's guide to slots. So a slot is a literal take-off slot in an airport, and obviously some slots are better than others because some are at peak times and obviously some are at worst times. But how do you decide who gets the best slots? Well, aviation has kind of broadly perhaps a bizarre system called the 80-20 rule. And what it means is if you hold a slot and you use it 80% of the time, you can keep that slot forever. And the reason why we have that is to give airlines a little bit of leeway if they have to cancel a slot for, say, for bad weather or whatever kind of comes up. But it also doesn't sort of punish them too much. But the argument against these slot rules is that 20% is way too lenient, and that their argument is that airlines are one kind of hoarding these slots, they're keeping them forever, and that the argument is that major airlines are kind of gaming the system by cancelling the slots as and when to kind of keep the best times forever and ever. Now, the reason this has particularly become a problem recently is that for the first time in many, many years, we now have a third and fourth entrant into the Australian aviation market that are now challenging Qantas and Virgin, and they are basically saying that they feel this whole slot system is against them. We had a situation where the Sydney Airport CEO came out last week and basically said to Qantas and Virgin, either use your slots or give them up, which is quite a big intervention. Virgin had already come out and said formally they're not doing anything dodgy at all, and that the reason that there's a high cancellation rate at Sydney is due to the weather and due to the ATC staffing issues. We hadn't necessarily had such an on-the-record response from Qantas, but they clearly now feel the need to respond. Deep breath. breath. Jake, what did they say?
Yeah, so Qantas basically came out and said Sydney Airport is demonising its biggest customer. They said
that's quite threatening, isn't it?
That's a very strong intervention there from Andrew David, the domestic CEO of Qantas. He says that any suggestion that the Flying Kangaroo was gaming the system is simply wrong. He has blamed as well the bad weather at Sydney Airport, which in fairness there has been a lot of, and the ATC staffing issues, which in fairness, if you've listened to this podcast, there have been a lot of. For the high cancellation rates. So Qantas, came out in a statement in its response and says Sydney's independent slot manager has returned 99% of Qantas's slots in its most recent completed season. Qantas says, quote, "This says two things, that we use our slots and when we don't, we lose them. Sydney Airport is clearly frustrated at airline cancellations because it means lost revenue for them. It typically means the same for Qantas, as well as significant costs that are paid regardless. It's worth noting that Qantas, which has its main operational hub in Sydney, has had the highest level of on-time performance of the major domestic airlines for 10 months in a row and the lowest level of cancellations nationally for the past 12 months. Now, the domestic CEO, Andrew David, has said... simply wrong to say that we are hoarding takeoff slots. He says there does seem to be some misdirected frustration from Sydney Airport. This is a quote, because they wish the system was different and they could unlock more revenue. We understand that, but we're not sure demonising your biggest customer is the way to go about it. We'd much prefer to work cooperatively with Sydney Airport on this, especially after what the whole industry has been through over the past few years. And Qantas has said something interesting as well, by the way. They've basically accused Sydney Airport of wanting to get domestic airlines to give up their slots so that international airlines can use them instead, because international airlines will spend... their passengers will spend more time in the terminal, buy more food and drink, maybe buy some duty-free, and that will drive airport revenue. So they're suggesting that Sydney Airport has its own ulterior motives for this.
I mean, I can totally understand why Qantas felt the need to get their side of the story across. What I'm going to say now about Qantas, I said about almost every aviation business in the Australian aviation market, which is a very kind of cut and thrust industry, is quite a passive-aggressive response, I would say, Jake.
I don't know if I'd even say passive, Adam. It's pretty damn aggressive.
I mean, when they say, it was almost like you might want to think twice about demonising your biggest customer. That's like when me and Chris are in the airport saying, "Don't you know who I am?" And we're not getting level of delusion, isn't it?
Wake up with a Boeing 747 nose cone in their bed or something.
But it's a very angry response. I mean, when you look at all of the sides of a debate, everybody kind of says what you would expect them to say. You've got Virgin and Qantas saying this is complete nonsense. We're not in any way gaming the system. You've got Rex and Bonza who are basically saying at the very least, are saying the system really doesn't work. You've got Sydney Airport who, as Qantas might suggest, have their own motives, perhaps for saying that the slot system needs to change. But arguably, the only independent organisation in this whole row is the ACCC, and the ACCC, who have chosen their words very carefully, but they have said that this system can be taken advantage of. It does feel that this row is rumbling on and on and on. I don't really know where it ends, but clearly there is a push from a lot of players for some kind of government intervention to change the system. As yet, we're not hearing anything, though.
Yeah. Oh no, we're not going to have to start calling this Slotgate, are we? That's going to be Slotgate.
If you have another name for Slotgate, alongside the Australian Aviation Awards, send us media at australianaviation.com.au.
Slotgazi might be even worse.
Well, we had
Game of slots.
No, that's terrible.
No, I think Adam would say the Slot of Thrones, which doesn't make sense.
But anyway, Rexit was good. Rexit was very good. So we need another phrase to just help our news writing, really. If you have any ideas,
I don't know. There's something about the slot machine, the playing the slots.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. There's loads of the potential. So, I mean, again, send us your ideas, and we'll at least talk about it on the show.
Yeah, but no, this is a saga that's not going to end, and something's got to give eventually. Something has to give eventually. The most logical thing to give would be a reform of the slot rules, because this situation can't persist forever. I mean, again, Western Sydney opening up in a couple of years' time will take some of the pressure off of Sydney Airport, but the airport is still Australia's main international gateway, and WSI is only going to have the one runway to start with, so it's not going to solve the problem completely.
Well, Rex's John Sharp, his idea is he wants to change 80-20 to 90-10, which he said would, eliminate a lot of the problems. I don't necessarily see any drive from government to make this change at all. It doesn't seem to me that something that is on the agenda of anyone other than not just us, but I mean the aviation industry.
Yeah. And that's just plain wrong.
Oh dear. Oh dear. Right. Well, on that note, maybe the pun signifies the end of a section. We are going to talk one more big story of the week, which is what Jake would call the ongoing furor over Sky Kittens.
Firstly, it's you would call that Sky Kittens, Adam. I thought we established last time.
It is a group thing.
Yeah,
I can't take the credit for coining the phrase Sky Kittens, though.
Yeah, but I'm suggesting that you might call it the purring of Sky Kittens instead of the noise of aircraft.
Yes, of course. Anyway, talk us through the latest development and give our listeners some background on this.
Yeah, so Air Services Australia has come out and announced that it's having community consultations on its purring action plan for Brisbane Airport this month. This would involve allowing Sky Kittens to both arrive and depart over Moreton Bay as priority when odd conditions allow. So this is called simultaneous opposite direction runway operations, or SOD props, which is an excellent name, may I say. Yeah, it would allow the Sky Kittens to arrive and depart over Moreton Bay as a priority when conditions allow, and it would implement purring sharing alternatives to ease the nighttime. Did we come up with an alternative for impacts?
No.
To ease the nighttime cuddles on communities to the north and northeast of the airport. So there's going to be 14 drop-in sessions around the city, as well as 2 online sessions. Community feedback is open until the 10th of September. This is Air Services CEO Jason Harfield has said that it wants to ensure it's a transparent process which demonstrates the organisation's commitment to improving noise outcomes. This is a direct quote, for the Brisbane community where safe and operationally feasible. Stephen Beckett of the Brisbane Airport Corporation has said that he welcomes this progress to increase the percentage of flights over Moreton Bay, to reduce the impact of nighttime operations and make SOD props priority mode instead of only nighttime use. But the community group, the Brisbane Flight Path Community Alliance, BFPCA, back in June, they sort of marched on Brisbane Airport in a protest. They wanted caps and curfews. They say that the proposals are shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic. Professor Marcus Foth, who's the chair of the BFPCA, he said that increased use of SOD props would require CASA to relax the safety standards, which he says that they're not going to do. He's come out swinging at Air Services Australia, saying that they're asking permission and they're asking forgiveness instead of permission from launching this, quote, disastrous airspace design in 2020. They're now coming back seeking forgiveness through rats and mice changes on the edges, which is very interesting considering the Sky Kittens. He says they've ran through awful designs. They now have Brisbane communities scrambling to make sense of new proposals that are highly technical and, from BFPCA's assessment, will make very minimal difference to people already impacted, but also spread the problem further to other communities. He says he doesn't want noise sharing as the first go-to solution, and regular everyday plane passengers should not be put at risk to help Air Services fix the mess they have forced on the people of Brisbane. Basically all that direct quote.
So essentially, Brisbane doesn't have a curfew at the moment, which is a unique advantage that they have. Obviously, the local community are now pushing hard to get a curfew because that's almost like that would be the end game from them. But Brisbane Airport would point out that, one, the whole city is growing right now. You've got an Olympics turning up in 10 years' time. This is not the time to stifle the growth of an airport, just as it's got its new runway open. Chris, I'll bring you in here. What do you think about the latest in this? You love the sound of an aircraft, though. The purring of Sky Kittens.
I absolutely love the purring of Sky Kittens, and I think anyone who doesn't needs to go and see a doctor. But honestly, it's one government department arguing with another government department. We've kind of seen this. Get on with it. Come up with a workable solution together. Rather than argue with each other and fight against each other, come up with a solution together that is workable for people living under the Sky Kitten purring flight path.
What I would say, actually, on that note, on Saturday, I went for brunch in Petersham, A lovely area of
nice.
Sydney. And apart from the fact that the brunch itself wasn't very good, I ordered egg on toast and I literally just got bread with 2 fried eggs shoved on the side. I mean, at least just put some sort of oil or something to make it look good. And that directly under the international flight path.
That's egg near toast.
Yes, exactly. It wasn't. If it didn't even put it on the bread, which anyway, I didn't really care about the mediocre standard of the presentation because we were in the perfect distance from the airport on the flight path. It felt like the planes were just almost touching the rooftops, and every 5 minutes you were presented with another big wide-body aircraft. It was fantastic.
It's amazing, isn't it?
And the person I was having brunch with was like, obviously, it makes things really difficult. I'm like, this is living for me. Like, if anything, I was thinking, do I move to Petersham for this? It was great.
I would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, there's probably a lot of valid reason to move to Petersham.
it's a very lovely part of the world. It's a very lovely part of the
Not
world.
for the brunch, though. You wouldn't move there for the brunch.
Well, just that particular. And actually, I just picked the wrong dish. But nonetheless, the point is that it really added to the ambience of the brunch.
Absolutely.
Well,
It'd make conversation a bit difficult, though, wouldn't it?
Not really, because obviously we're just talking about aircrafts the whole time, as I'd imagine we all would do pretty much all the time anyway. So I don't think, if anything, it was like, oh, brilliant, there's another conversation starter. It's a 747 going up. Oh, is that, is that cargo? Is that passenger?
There wouldn't be any 747s going up.
Oh, there are. You have plenty of cargo 747s.
Oh, no, that's true. Cargo
Yes.
747s?
Yes, well, you've embarrassed yourself there. We're going to have lots of angry listeners writing to complain.
Damn, I'm going to have to go into hiding, aren't I?
Yeah, very often will you see a queen in the sky. And on that note, before you get yourself into any more trouble, we're going to wrap it up for
There
this
wouldn't be
week.
passenger 747s going up.
Well, that's not what you said. Like, let's not dig yourself. You already dug yourself in
There are
this.
still plenty of airlines flying 747 passenger services. We just don't see that many come into Sydney anymore, unfortunately.
And that was the authority there. That's why Chris has held every single job in aviation, bar flying the plane. Chris, thank you very much for joining us.
I have a quick shout out.
Go on.
Quick shout out.
You got loads. Go on.
Yeah, I've got loads. So Megan W from Sydney sent me a DM. She slid into my DMs.
Wow, that's never happened to me.
Oh, really?
No, I'm old. Go on.
I'm older than you. That's
what I mean.
So
DMs.
Megan W slid into my messages and said that she loves the podcast, loves listening to us each week. She's saved it as a favourite, so she gets an alert every time the podcast drops. And as she travels to or from work, she listens to our podcast. Megan actually works in corporate travel, so kind of similar industry. She books people on the planes, the sky kitten pairing that we're talking about. So Megan, thanks for listening to us. We love that you tune into us every week and keep listening.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And Jake, thank you very much. You got any more shout outs for us?
Shout out to Pizza Hut in Windsor, which is like the old fashioned Pizza Hut. Like with the all you can eat salad bars and
Did you have
everything.
a good time there?
Yeah, no, I took.
What did you?
I took my fiance out there because I noticed that they still exist. There's like 2 of them in Sydney. One's in Windsor and one's in Minto. But I went there and they had the all-you-can-eat pizza bar and salad bar and the dessert bar with the mousse and the tiny chocolate chips and everything. And I'm like, this is my childhood right here.
Well,
so.
thank you very much, Pizza Hut, for keeping my co-host well fed.
Absolutely.
And on that note, we will wrap things up. But we will be back on this show the same time next week. But for now, from us, goodbye.
Bye-bye.
See ya.